In this video, you're going to make a cool screen that shows up every time players win the game. We're nearing the end of the series, so stick with it and we'll have a published game soon. Alright, so in our game window, I'm going to go and take this wall, the one that our ramp is touching, and I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. I'm going to drag it off to the side a little bit, and I'm going to move this new part out of our walls group and back into the workspace. And let's rename this Final Part, just one word. And now I'm going to rotate it so that it's flat and can make a platform. So I'm going to click on this red one and rotate it. Make sure your snap is on by going to Model, and under Snap to Grid, click Snap. 90 degrees will give you a perfect turn so it's nice and completely flat and level with our ground. Okay, move it so it's touching, drag it up, and we want it to be exactly at the top of our walls and make it a little bit wider on each side. There we go. I'm looking at this line right here. And again on this side, move it out. And there we go. It's the perfect size. Now with our final part inside, we have to write a big screen that congratulates our winners. So in order to do that, we're going to go in our Explorer window. I'm going to shrink down our workspace and go down to the Starter GUI. GUI stands for Graphical User Interface, but you can just think about this as the place where we're going to put all our buttons, health bars, any sort of 2D element or numbers you want to see on your screen. I'm going to click on Starter GUI, click the gray plus sign that shows up next to its name, and click Screen GUI. And inside our Screen GUI, we're going to click on it and click the gray plus button again and create a frame. And now we see this white box that shows up on our screen. I'm also going to exit out of our output window so we have as much screen space as possible. Okay, so in our Explorer window, I'm going to click on Frame. And now in our Properties window, we can edit stuff about our frame. I'm going to scroll down, and the first thing I'm going to change is size. Size is written a little bit differently for 2D elements, but just follow along and I'll explain what's happening. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to backspace to delete all of it. I'm going to do a curly bracket, and then type 1, and then comma, and then 0, and then another curly bracket to close it. And then I'm going to hit comma again and write the exact same thing. So curly bracket, 1, comma, 0, curly bracket. Okay, so we should have two sets of curly brackets separated by a comma that say 1, comma, 0. And when I hit enter, the whole screen should turn white. So how this works is that with things that are 2D that don't have any depth, they just have the X and the Y, the height and the width. And the first number for our width, this X value, is 1, which represents the percentage of the screen it takes up. So 1 equals 100%, 0.5 equals 50%. And so see, by changing it to 0.5, half the screen is now covered by our frame, but we want to change it back to 1. Now we're going to scroll up and change the color of this frame. So where it says background color 3, we're going to go over here to this white square, click it, and change the color to whatever you want. I'm going to make mine purple because that's the main color in the game. And then we're going to want to adjust the transparency so it's a little bit see-through. I'm going to make mine halfway, 0.5. And now I'm going to hit enter, and that's set. And now we want to go back up to our Explorer window, hit this plus sign, and hit text label. This is going to create text inside of our frame. So click on the text label, and we're going to start by changing the size of this one as well. So scroll down to size, and you'll see that our size only uses a second value within the curly brackets, unlike the size we set on the frame here. This means that instead of using the percentages to set the size, we're using pixels. We're going to set it as 600 pixels wide, which looks like that, and then 250 pixels tall, which looks like that. And now we want to center it in our screen. So we move it halfway across our screen by changing this first number in position to 0.5. So that's 50% of the width and 50% of the height. So now this top left corner is in the right spot. It's the top left corner is in the center, but we want this, our text, to be in the center. So to do that, we're going to subtract half the width, which is going to move it halfway this way, and half the height, which is going to move it halfway this way. We can also click and drag it into place, which I'm going to do now, since you guys already see how the numbers work. And there we go. It locks it halfway in between. I'm also going to reset it, Control Z, and show you how we can do it with the numbers over here. We can actually use these pixel values here and subtract half the width of our text label. So its width is 600, so we're gonna subtract 300, and there, now it's centered horizontally side to side. And if we subtract half of our height, negative 125, it's gonna move it vertically centered. Now with our text label selected, we're gonna scroll down again and find text, and this is where we can change the font size, color, and what the label says. So the first thing we're gonna do is change the text. So under this gray text section, scroll down to where it says text and click on where it says label, because that's its original text, and we can write whatever here, but I'm gonna write U1 exclamation point. Okay, and we're gonna want this to be much bigger, so let's scroll down a little bit. See where it says text scaled? You can also change the text size here, but I'm just gonna do text scaled because it's faster. Scroll back up to right at the top of our text section, and where it says font face, you can open it and choose any font you want. I'm just gonna go with Bangers. I'm gonna change the font color from black to orange because my obby is purple and orange. And I just want the text to be visible. I don't want this big white rectangle on my screen. I think that's kind of ugly, so I'm gonna scroll all the way back up, find my background color under the data section. Instead of changing the background color, we're gonna go right underneath it to background transparency and set that to 1. So it's 100% transparent. Now we gotta do one last thing before we get into our code. So we go to Screen GUI and we click Enabled. And that makes it invisible because that's actually what we want. We want our windscreen to be invisible until our player reaches this platform. So now we just gotta write a code that will make it visible again. So go into our player added script and go to where our code is checking to see what the player is touching. We already have this line that checks if our player is touching a checkpoint, but let's add an if else or an else if and check if the hit.name is equal to our final part. Make sure to put it in quotation marks and make sure the spelling here is exactly the same as you spelled it here in your workspace. And I did. And so now whatever we put in here is gonna run whenever we touch our final part. So we're gonna put player, which is our player value from up here, dot player GUI, dot screen GUI, because that's the very first child of our starter GUI, green GUI, dot enabled, and then we wanna set it to true. When we touch a part that has the name final part, we're gonna enable our screen GUI. And now, why did I put player GUI here instead of starter GUI? Let's hit play and we'll see exactly why. With our game running, if we go into players, we have this player GUI menu. And we open it up and we see this screen GUI represents exactly what we added in our starter GUI. And if we scroll down in our text label, we see the font face that we chose and the text that we wrote. So when our player gets added to the game automatically moves whatever is in our starter GUI into the player GUI. And so now when we run up and finish the game, our GUI turns on. And that blue box goes away because I just had the thing selected. All right, so we want this to disappear after like 10 seconds, so it's not just up on the screen forever once you've won the game. So let's hit stop and we'll type wait 10 seconds, and then we'll take the same thing, Control C, Control V, and we want it to be false instead. Okay, but the problem with this is that as long as we're running on the final part, it's gonna keep triggering this over and over again. So it's gonna re-trigger the enabled as true and wait another 10 seconds for as long as we're on the part. So we can do this with a simple switch called the debounce. So above your touch event, write local debounce equals false. And now as part of our else if, we check if the name is final part and debounce equals false. If it is, then run this. And here we wanna set it so debounce equals true so that this won't run until after our wait is done and debounce equals false again. All right, so let's see what happens. We touch our part named final part. We see that it's not in our checkpoints folder. We then check if the name is final part, which I already said it is. And we check if our debounce is false, which if it's the first time we touch it, it will be. So as soon as we know that we've just hit our final part and our debounce equals false, then we're gonna set our debounce to equal true. So this won't run again. This will only run once until after we've waited this 10 seconds and set it back to false. And in the meantime, we've set our GUI to true, meaning our U1 screen pops up and then we wait 10 seconds and then it equals false again, which means it disappears. So let's test it out and see how it goes. Okay, and now we're gonna wait 10 seconds. And there it goes. And now it's turned back on. Okay, so you probably see we have this little line at the top. Let's fix that real quick. I'm gonna go into our screen GUI, enable it so we can see, and we just want to scroll down to where it says ignore GUI inset, and then click it back to disabled so it's only visible at the end. Run up the ramp and we'll see it's fixed. There we go, no more gap at the top. All right, you got one more video after this. We're gonna go over how to publish the game and then changes you can make to add more to your obby.